15-year-old Aaliyah Carter stood on the steps of Lincoln High School, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her hoodie, fingers cold despite the crisp Virginia morning sun. She took a deep breath, then another. This was her third high school in as many years, a consequence of her father's job with the federal government, though most people never asked why she moved around so much. They just noticed that she didn't talk much, kept her head down, and seemed to know exactly when to disappear before drama unfolded. Inside, the school buzzed with early chatter, lockers clanging open and shut, sneakers squeaking against the floors. Aaliyah moved carefully through the halls, her backpack snug on her shoulders, her dark brown eyes scanning the unfamiliar sea of faces. No one looked at her twice, just how she liked it. She had only been at Lincoln for a few weeks. The move to Richmond had been sudden, prompted by a reassignment her father couldn't talk about, classified, he'd said, with that serious tone that made her mother roll her eyes but made Aaliyah pay attention. He was a senior investigator with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and while Aaliyah didn't know the details of his work, she knew enough to understand that he carried burdens heavier than most. She'd grown up around quiet rooms, late-night phone calls, and a house that always had the windows locked, even in summer. At school, she kept her world small. Honors classes, lunch in the library, headphones during free periods. She wasn't antisocial, just cautious. She'd learned early that being a new black girl in a mostly white school came with unspoken expectations and landmines. Better to watch first. Learn who laughed too loudly, who whispered when you passed, who stood in corners pretending not to stare. In her English class, her teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, once commented on her essays. "You have a poetic way with truth," she'd said. Aaliyah had smiled politely and murmured a thank you, but she didn't volunteer to read aloud, didn't raise her hand, and didn't linger after class. She'd learned how to disappear in plain sight. It was a kind of armor. Home was quieter. Their new house sat in a cul-de-sac lined with trimmed hedges and American flags, the kind of neighborhood where people waved but didn't really talk. Her mother, Camille, had taken a part-time job at the local library, filling her days with shelves and stories. Her father, Agent Malcolm Carter, was already working late nights, coming home with that familiar tightness in his jaw. He always made time to check in with Aaliyah, even if it was just to sit on the couch beside her while she did homework, their silence comfortable. "You settling in okay?" he asked one evening, flipping through a manila folder while sipping his coffee. "Yeah," Aaliyah said, eyes on her textbook. "It's fine." That was their code for, "I'll tell you if it's not." And so he nodded, trusting her. In the weeks that followed, Aaliyah began to notice the way things worked at Lincoln High. The football players had their corner of the cafeteria, loud and easy in their dominance. The theater kids camped out near the art rooms, all expressive hand gestures and mismatched clothing. Then there were the untouchables, the rich kids, the loud ones, the ones who walked the halls like they owned them. At the center of that world was Logan Miller. She saw him for the first time during fourth period, strutting into biology late, no apology, just a nod to the teacher who said nothing. Blonde, broad-shouldered, with a laugh that cut through silence like a blade. People gravitated toward him, not always in admiration, but out of wariness. He was the kind of person who made you feel like you were always auditioning. Aaliyah kept her distance. She didn't want to be noticed by someone like Logan. After school, she would retreat to her safe zones. The public library, the neighborhood park where the leaves were just starting to fall, or the quiet back porch where she could sketch in her notebook. Drawing was her escape. Faces, mostly. Sometimes her mother's tired smile. Sometimes the jagged lines of cities they'd left behind. Sometimes just shadows. No one at school knew anything about her father. She liked it that way. The name Carter didn't mean much to anyone here, and she wasn't about to change that, because being the daughter of a federal agent came with questions, and those questions came with consequences. She didn't wear designer sneakers. She didn't chase clout or gossip. She wasn't trying to be anyone's best friend, but she had a quiet fire, one that simmered beneath her stillness. A fire that came from growing up in a house where justice wasn't just a word, but a mission. For now, though, Aaliyah Carter was just a new girl, quiet, smart, invisible. She had no idea how quickly that would change. And neither did Logan Miller. The bell rang to signal the end of fifth period, and the hallways of Lincoln High School erupted into a wave of movement and noise. Aaliyah Carter, her notebook clutched tightly against her chest, stepped into the corridor with her usual rhythm, calm, observant, calculated. She kept close to the wall, moving quietly as a tide of students rushed around her. She wasn't afraid of crowds, but she'd learned long ago that the safest place to be was on the edges, never in the center. She was on her way to her locker before heading to sixth period, headphones in but without music playing. It was a trick she used often. It gave her the appearance of being disconnected, unreachable, while allowing her to hear everything. Whispers, side conversations, laughter that didn't quite match the tone of what was being said. She picked up everything. That's why she noticed a sudden shift in tone before she even saw what was coming. A sharp laugh, a murmur, a presence too close. Turning a corner near the science wing, she rounded into the main hallway just as Logan Miller and a couple of his friends were coming from the opposite direction. Their voices were loud, full of that easy confidence that came from being untouchable. Aaliyah instinctively shifted to the side to make space, keeping her head down. Her shoulder brushed lightly against Logan's arm. Not hard, not enough to even notice under normal circumstances. But he stopped. "Watch it," Logan said sharply, his voice carrying above the ambient noise. His friends went quiet. Aaliyah paused, looked up. Her expression was neutral, eyebrows slightly raised in a silent acknowledgement. More of a "my bad" than an apology. That was when Logan shoved her. It wasn't playful. It wasn't subtle. His hand landed square against her upper chest, forcing her backwards into the row of lockers with a loud metallic thud. Her notebook slipped from her hands and scattered across the floor, papers fluttering. Her back stung where it hit the metal, and for a moment, the noise of the hallway seemed to vanish. Aaliyah's breath caught, but she didn't cry out. She just stood there, stunned, her body rigid against a locker, eyes wide but unreadable. Logan leaned slightly closer, his voice low but venomous. "Next time, try seeing where you're going, girl." The way he said girl wasn't just about gender. It was laced with condescension, with centuries of weight behind it. Aaliyah felt it in her stomach before she heard it clearly. A slur, quiet under his breath, but loud enough for her and anyone standing nearby to catch. Someone sucked in a breath. Another kid stepped back. She looked at him, meeting his eyes. For a long second, no one said anything. Then she bent down, picked up her papers without a word, gathered her notebook, and turned away. Her hand was shaking slightly, but her face remained still, controlled. She walked down the hallway, the chatter resuming slowly behind her, as if the school itself was trying to pretend nothing had happened. What she didn't see, what Logan didn't see, was a girl near the water fountain, holding her phone just below her books, recording the entire thing. Her name was Kayla. She didn't say anything either. She just stared at the screen, then tucked the phone into her pocket, her jaw tight. Aaliyah made it to the bathroom before the adrenaline started to fade. She locked herself in the stall and sat down on the toilet seat, her heart pounding. The coldness of the locker still clung to her back like a memory. She stared at the inside of the door, letting the silence wrap around her. Not a tear fell. This wasn't the first time she had seen someone like Logan. Not the first time someone used their weight, their entitlement, to make someone smaller. But it was the first time it happened to her like this. So blatant, so public, and still, not a single voice had come to her defense. She stayed in that stall for 7 minutes. When she finally stepped out, she washed her hands slowly, her eyes locked on her reflection in the mirror. There was no visible bruise, no blood, just the hollow tension of someone holding back a storm. In the last period of the day, she sat through chemistry without speaking. Mr. Davenport was reviewing lab procedures, but his voice felt distant. Logan sat 2 rows behind her. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Aaliyah could feel the heat of the moment still lingering around them, the way others kept glancing her way, then quickly looking down. After the final bell, she walked straight home. No detour, no stop at the library, no sketches today. At dinner, her mother asked if anything interesting happened at school. Aaliyah shook her head. Her father studied her for a moment, then changed the subject. Later that night, while she was in her room, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a video. No text, no context. Just a clip, 37 seconds long, shot from the water fountain. It showed the entire encounter. Aaliyah rounding the corner, the shove, the slur, her silent retreat. The footage was clear, the audio sharp. She watched it once, then again, then she deleted it. But she didn't forget it. Neither did the girl who sent it. By the next morning, whispers had already started moving through the halls. Not everyone had seen the video, but some had heard it existed. Logan walked the halls the same way he always did, like nothing happened, like nothing ever stuck to him. When Aaliyah passed him near the cafeteria, his mouth curled into a smirk, as if daring her to say something. She didn't flinch. She knew how people like Logan operated. He didn't want an apology. He wanted submission and silence. But what he didn't know, what no one at that school knew, was that Aaliyah Carter wasn't alone. And some silences aren't signs of fear. They're warnings. By Thursday morning, Lincoln High was a battlefield of silence, smirks, and whispered conversations. Aaliyah could feel the shift the moment she stepped onto campus. Eyes lingered a little longer. Conversation stopped when she walked by. No one said her name, but she could sense it hanging in the air, thin, sharp, cutting through the noise. She didn't need to see the video again to know that it had started to circulate, quietly, selectively, passed from one phone to another in hushed tones, like contraband. In homeroom, two girls stared at her from across the room, whispering into cupped hands. Aaliyah ignored them. She sat at her desk, pulled out her notebook, and began sketching. Lines flowed from her pencil, swift, precise, until they became the outline of a face she didn't recognize. She didn't draw Logan. She didn't draw herself. Just shadows. When the announcements ended, she made her way to AP History. On her way, a boy she didn't know walked past her and muttered, "Guess you didn't like being touched." He said it with a laugh, but the tone behind it wasn't casual. It was a jab. She kept walking. Inside the classroom, Mr. Langford continued his lecture on post-war reconstruction, but Aaliyah barely heard it. Her mind was moving through the layers of that moment 2 days ago. How Logan's show wasn't just about anger. It was performance. A show. A way to establish a hierarchy. And now, as the story of what happened began to evolve beyond her control, the school was shifting into a familiar pattern. Deny, distract, dismiss. She hadn't told her parents. Not yet. Her mother would be concerned. Her father would be something else entirely. And while part of her wanted a hand over everything, the video, the details, the weight of it, another part held back, afraid of what might happen as she opened that door. Malcolm Carter didn't believe in letting things slide. During lunch, she sat alone in the library, pretending to read while her phone buzzed with a message from Jasmine, her older cousin. The text was simple. "You good?" Aaliyah stared at the screen, then typed, "I'm fine." She deleted it before sending. Instead, she replied, "Yeah." She wasn't sure if that counted as a lie. That afternoon, during gym class, things took another turn. The unit was indoor soccer. Teams picked hastily. Aaliyah wasn't particularly athletic, but she was quick, agile, and careful. Logan was on the opposing team. She noticed the moment he clocked her presence. His smirk returned. He played rough, always had. But this time, his movements were deliberate. Halfway through the game, as Aaliyah darted for the ball near the wall, Logan came in hard from the side. His shoulder collided with hers, and the impact sent her sprawling to the ground, her elbow scraping the wooden floor as she landed with a sharp exhale. The coach blew the whistle, but it was more out of routine than concern. Accidental collision. Coach Miller called out from the sideline, "Keep playing." Aaliyah sat up slowly, her elbow stinging. Logan was already walking away, not even bothering to look back. A few teammates muttered something about it being a little much, but no one challenged him directly. After class, she visited the nurse for antiseptic. The nurse asked what happened. Aaliyah just said, "Jim." Nothing more. By the time the final bell rang, her patience had thinned to its last edge. On the way to her locker, she passed a group of students loitering near the science wing. One of them, Mia Sanderson, a quiet girl from her English class, caught her eye for a second too long, then looked away. At her locker, Aaliyah found something new. Scrawled in red ink across the metal, just above the latch, were 3 words. "Cry harder, freak." She stared at it for a long moment, unmoving. She didn't reach for the lock. She didn't look around. She just stood there, letting the message sink in. Eventually, she turned away, walked down the hall, and found an empty classroom. She sat at the teacher's desk, breathing through the weight in her chest. She wasn't afraid, but she was tired. At home, she almost said something. Her father was reading in the living room, glasses low on his nose, the soft rhythm of jazz playing in the background. Her mother was in the kitchen, humming as she diced vegetables. Aaliyah hovered in the hallway, notebook in hand, but the words never came. Instead, she retreated to her room, shut the door, and stared at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed again, this time with another message from Jasmine. "I heard about what happened. Call me," Aaliyah replied. "Later," then shut the phone off completely. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her dreams were jumbled flashes of lockers slamming shut, muffled voices, and her own name echoing in an empty hallway. She woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning and sat in silence, the room dim with the first hint of dawn. On Friday, Logan was louder than usual. His laugh carried through the halls, his shoulders broad with the kind of arrogance that came from knowing he wouldn't be touched. Teachers smiled at him. Girls lingered near him. And though the video still hadn't gone public, its presence hung like smoke. By lunchtime, Aaliyah overheard a conversation between 2 students near the vending machines. "Yeah, I saw it." She didn't even fight back. "She's probably trying to sue or something. You know how they get." The words hit harder than the shove. She didn't speak. She didn't look at them. She walked to the library again, found her usual spot, and opened her notebook. But this time, instead of drawing, she wrote a list, names, dates, locations. She didn't know what she was going to do with it yet, but she was done staying still. By the end of the day, the video finally made its way into a broader circle. A student posted it anonymously to a private Instagram account meant for school gossip. The post was simple. "You still think he's innocent?" Within an hour, it had hundreds of views. Logan didn't react publicly, but word spread quickly. Some students deleted comments they had made. Others reshared the video privately. A few were angry, not at Logan, but at whoever posted it. The school administrators hadn't said a word. No announcements. No investigation. But the air had changed again. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and cast golden streaks across her bedroom walls, Aaliyah sat with the door closed, the curtains drawn. Her phone buzzed once more. A new message, this time from a number she didn't recognize. The message read, "Don't think you're brave. You're not the first. You won't be the last." She stared at it, then deleted it, then turned the phone off again. But something had shifted, because now, silence wasn't just survival. It was a countdown. The weekend passed with a quiet tension Aaliyah couldn't shake. She stayed off social media, kept her phone powered down, and avoided the outside world as much as she could. Her mother noticed her silence, but didn't push. Her father was gone most of Saturday and Sunday. Work, he said, and she was grateful for the distance. She wasn't ready to bring him into the center of it yet. Not until she knew what she wanted from the truth. Not until she knew what the truth would cost. By Monday morning, the storm was still brewing. The video hadn't gone viral beyond the school, but it had reached more students than before. Some classmates stared at her with unease. Others glanced away, pretending they hadn't seen it. And Logan Miller? He walked the halls with the same swagger as always, untouched. There was no apology, no remorse, just power. It was during third period gym class that things escalated again. Coach Miller, already known for his indifferent attitude, had split the class into teams for a game of dodgeball. Aaliyah hadn't wanted to participate, but sitting out wasn't an option. As she stood near the back of her team's side, scanning for the red foam ball hurtling through the air, she felt someone shove her from behind. just enough to throw her balance. She stumbled forward, caught herself, and turned around. Logan stood a few feet behind her, hands on his hips, wearing a grin too smug to be innocent. "Oops," he said lightly. "You should watch your step." The coach didn't see it. Or maybe he did and just chose not to react. Aaliyah bit the inside of her cheek, forcing herself to stay still. The game ended 10 minutes later, and as the students were filing out, Logan passed by her in the locker room hallway and whispered, "You're not special, Carter. No one's coming to save you." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch her, but the message was clear. After class, she walked straight to the counselor's office. The receptionist asked her to wait. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When the counselor, Ms. Doran, finally invited her in, she spoke in that careful, rehearsed tone reserved for students who were possibly overreacting. "I understand you had some challenges adjusting," Ms. Doran began, folding her hands over a neatly stacked planner. "Do you want to tell me what's going on?" Aaliyah hesitated, then told her. Not everything, not the video or the threats, but the game, the shove, the whisper, the pattern. Ms. Doran nodded as she listened, occasionally scribbling something down. When Aaliyah finished, the counselor offered a soft smile. "Well," she said gently, "these things can sometimes be misinterpreted. Teenage interactions can be complicated. Is it possible that Logan didn't mean anything by it?" Aaliyah stared at her, too stunned to speak. Ms. Doran continued, "We'll keep an eye on the situation, okay? If anything else happens, please come back." The conversation was over, just like that. As Aaliyah walked out of the office, she passed by a group of students talking near the lockers. One of them, Lena, from her biology class, looked at her with what almost seemed like guilt in her eyes, but she didn't say a word. By lunchtime, the whispers had shifted again. Someone had commented under the video on Instagram, saying Aaliyah had a history of exaggerating things and was trying to cancel a good guy over nothing. The post had been taken down within the hour, but not before others screenshotted it. The school's digital undercurrent pulsed with tension. At her locker, Aaliyah found another message. This time, a piece of paper shoved through the vent slats. It read, "Nobody believes you." She crumpled it without reading it twice and walked away. That evening, she sat in the living room while her parents watched television. She said nothing, just sat on the edge of the couch, scrolling through old texts, rereading Jasmine's message from before. Eventually, she got up, walked to her room, and locked the door. She opened her backpack and pulled out the notebook, the one she started filling after the first incident. She flipped to the last page and began a new entry. "Today I told someone, and they smiled like it was a story I made up." She didn't cry, not yet, but something inside her began to press harder against the walls she had built. That night, she called Jasmine. Her cousin picked up on the first ring. "You okay?" "No," Aaliyah said. "I'm really not." She told her about gym class, the counselor, the locker note, everything except the video. Jasmine didn't interrupt. When Aaliyah finally stopped talking, there was a moment of silence. "I need you to send me the video," Jasmine said. "I deleted it." "No, you didn't. You never delete things like that." There was another pause. Aaliyah reached into her desk drawer and pulled out her old phone, the one she used before they moved. The video was there, tucked in a hidden folder. She had lied to herself more than anyone else. "I have it. Send it to me." Aaliyah hesitated. "If I show Dad, I know what he'll do, but you shouldn't carry this alone." Still, she didn't send it. Not that night. The next morning, Logan was waiting by her locker. Alone, he didn't speak right away. Just stood there, arms folded, eyes watching her as if measuring how much more pressure would take to crack her. "You think you're going to win this?" he asked. "No one cares. You're just some angry little girl with a chip on her shoulder." She didn't reply. She didn't move. Logan leaned in, voice low. "You're lucky I even noticed you." She turned slowly to face him. "You will regret this." Then she walked away. She didn't see the look on his face, but she heard the shift in his breathing, and that was enough. That afternoon, she pulled Jasmine aside outside the library. The building was quiet, the hallway empty. "I'm ready," she said. Jasmine opened her phone. "Send it to me now." Aaliyah did. The file transfer took 8 seconds. Jasmine looked at her. "You want me to show him?" Aaliyah nodded. "Not yet, but if he asks, don't lie." Later that night, while the house was quiet and her parents were asleep, Aaliyah stared at her ceiling again. She could still feel the sting of the dodgeball court, the cold edge of the counselor's smile. The paper note crumpled in her pocket. She thought about silence, about survival, about what it meant to tell the truth when no one wanted to hear it. And somewhere deep in that stillness, she realized something had changed. She was done waiting for someone to save her. She was going to make them listen. Wednesday morning came cloaked in gray clouds and a soft drizzle that turned the sidewalks into slick veins of reflected light. Aaliyah stood at the bus stop, hood pulled low, backpack heavy on her shoulders. The video still tucked away in her phone like a loaded question she hadn't fully asked yet. The silence between her and the truth was getting thinner, more brittle, and something inside her was starting to push against it. She hadn't spoken to Jasmine since Sunday night, hadn't sent another message, but the decision had been made. The chain of events had started moving, even if no one else saw it yet. At school, the atmosphere was different, tense, expectant. A few more students had seen the video now, and while no one addressed her directly, she could feel the undercurrent of unease running through the corridors. Logan was quieter than usual, his gaze sharper. He didn't smirk when she passed. He didn't speak, but his silence was loud. During lunch, Aaliyah sat outside under the overhang near the back of the school, rain misting just beyond the concrete lip above her. Her fingers moved through the pages of her sketchbook, though she wasn't drawing. She was trying to steady her breath, to find space inside her mind where the noise couldn't follow. That's when she heard the footsteps. "Hey," Jasmine said, stepping into the shelter of the overhang, arms crossed against the cold. Aaliyah blinked. "What are you doing here? You don't even go here." "I signed in at the front desk. Said I was delivering something for my aunt." "You skipped class of that?" Jasmine shrugged. "I figured if you weren't going to bring the fire, someone had to." Aaliyah gave her a look. "I didn't ask you to come." "No," Jasmine said, sitting beside her. "But you needed someone to." For a moment, they just sat there, the sound of rain filling the space between them. "You have the video?" Jasmine asked. Aaliyah nodded. "It's still on my phone." "I have a copy too. If something happens." Aaliyah swallowed. "It's already happening." "Then it's time." Aaliyah looked down at her lap. "I don't know if I'm ready to let him see it. You're not showing it to the world. Just your father. Just so he knows." Aaliyah was quiet for a long time. Then she pulled out her phone, opened the gallery, and handed it to Jasmine. "You do it." Jasmine hesitated. "You sure?" Aaliyah nodded once. Jasmine pressed send. The file transferred to her own phone again. Redundant, maybe, but now it was in more hands. Now it was real. Later that evening, after dinner, Aaliyah lingered near the living room. Her father was at his desk, reading reports under the soft glow of his desk lamp. The room dim but focused. His posture was always the same at that desk. Spine straight, elbows tight, jaw tense. Federal precision in every gesture. Jasmine had left 2 hours earlier. She hadn't told him anything, but she'd made a promise. If he asked, she would tell. If he didn't, she would wait. Aaliyah stood in the hallway watching him for several minutes before retreating to her room again, her thoughts pacing like wolves. At school the next day, something shifted again. It started during chemistry, when a girl named Marisol, a quiet junior who usually kept to herself, slid a folded note onto Aaliyah's desk during group work. No eye contact, just a motion, fast and quiet. Aaliyah waited until she was alone to read it. "He did the same thing to my cousin last year." She dropped out. "Never told anyone, but I saw your video. If you need a statement, I'll give you one. Don't let him get away with it." The paper trembled in her hands. She folded it again and slipped it into the front pocket of her backpack. During lunch, she sat in the library, headphones in but no music playing again. She scrolled through texts, through old photos, through the video once more. She had watched it so many times it no longer shocked her. But something had changed. It no longer felt like a memory. It felt like evidence. A knock on the table startled her. It was Kayla, the girl who'd filmed it in the first place. "Can I sit?" she asked. Aaliyah nodded. Kayla looked down at her hands. "I sent it to you because I thought you should have it. But I also kept a copy, in case you didn't do anything with it." Aaliyah stayed quiet. "I know I should have stepped in. I saw what he did, but I froze. I didn't know what to say." "You did more than anyone else," Aaliyah said. Kayla nodded slowly. "I think it's going to get worse before it gets better." "I know." They sat in silence for a few more moments before Kayla stood to leave. "If you need me, I'll say what I saw. I'll say it to anyone." Aaliyah watched her walk away. The walls around Logan were starting to thin. People were still afraid of him, still unsure, but the fear wasn't silent anymore. It was beginning to tremble, and trembles have a way of becoming cracks. That night, Malcolm Carter knocked on Aaliyah's door. She was at her desk, pencil in hand, working on a drawing of a girl in armor. Not heavy, not medieval. Simple, clean lines, a crown of fire resting above her head. "Can I come in?" he asked. She nodded. He stepped inside, hand behind his back, not smiling. "Your cousin sent me something," he said. Aaliyah didn't speak. He sat on the edge of her bed. "I watched it. Twice." She turned in her chair to face him. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked down. "I thought I could handle it." His voice was low, controlled, but his eyes burned. "You shouldn't have to." "I know." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You're my daughter, Aaliyah, and I know you're strong. But this isn't your weight to carry alone. I didn't want to set you off." Malcolm exhaled slowly. "You didn't. You gave me clarity." She looked at him then, truly looked. The fire was there, but so was precision. He wasn't going to rage. He was going to move. With purpose. With facts. With force. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He stood. "I'm going to make some calls. But first, I'm going to ask you something." She waited. "Are you ready for this to go all the way? If I step in, it won't be quiet. There will be consequences. For him, for the school, maybe even for you." Aaliyah nodded. "I'm ready." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Then it's my turn," and walked out of the room. It was early Thursday morning when the temperature dropped and tension inside Lincoln High grew thicker than the mist curling over the campus parking lot. Aaliyah arrived wearing her usual hoodie and headphones, the strap of her backpack pulled tighter than normal, as if she were holding herself in place. She had barely made it to the front doors before she felt the shift, the way the air changed when something unseen starts taking shape. By second period, she learned why. Logan Miller had cornered her again. It happened just after chemistry class, near the stairwell by the east hallway where student traffic thinned between periods. She had left the classroom slightly early, hoping to avoid him. But as she turned the corner, there he was, standing by her locker, arms crossed, like he had been waiting for her. She didn't stop walking. "You think this is over?" he said, voice low, sharp. "You think posting that video makes you right?" Aaliyah moved past him without breaking stride. "Get out of my way." But Logan stepped in again, blocking her path. "I don't care what people say. You and your little activist act? It's pathetic. No one's on your side." He was louder now, attracting attention. A few students slowed down, glancing nervously, but no one intervened. Aaliyah turned to face him fully. "You're the one yelling in a hallway. Logan, I'm just going to class. You're not going to anything until you stop lying." "Lying?" Her voice was steady. "There's a video. You really think you can talk your way out of proof?" Logan's jaw twitched. "That video doesn't mean anything. People bump into each other all the time." Aaliyah leaned in slightly, her words deliberate. "You call me a slur, in front of everyone." His eyes flared just for a second, and then behind them, a classroom door opened. A teacher, Mr. Blake, one of the younger, newer hires, stepped into the hallway, clearly noticing the commotion. He paused, his eyes flicking between Aaliyah and Logan. "What's going on here?" Before Leah could speak, Logan turned toward the teacher with that easy grin he always wore for adults. "Just a misunderstanding, Mr. Blake. We're good." Mr. Blake looked unsure, but after a pause, nodded. "All right, get to class, both of you." Logan gave Leah a final, smug look before walking off. She stood there for a few seconds longer, then turned toward her locker. Her hands trembled slightly as she twisted the lock. That afternoon, everything changed. Someone, still anonymous, uploaded the video to a broader platform. No longer hidden behind private school accounts or text threads, it hit a public student-run blog known for exposing scandals, gossip, and school controversies. The headline was blunt: "Racist assault at Lincoln High. Still no action taken." The video played beneath it, raw and unedited. Logan's shove, his slur, Aaliyah's silence. The post included commentary, a timeline of events, testimonies from students who had witnessed Logan's behavior before, and even a screenshot of the note Aaliyah had found in her locker. The story spread like wildfire. Within hours, hundreds of students had seen it, then parents, then people outside the school. It was reposted to Facebook, shared in local discussion forums, and picked up by a small independent news page that monitored school equity cases in the region. The school tried to control the narrative, but it was already too late. By the next morning, Aaliyah was called into the principal's office. She expected to face Mr. Holloway alone. Instead, she found him flanked by Assistant Principal Daniels and the school's counselor, Ms. Doran. Their faces were tense, composed, and laced with damage control. "We're aware of a video circulating online," Holloway began, hands folded neatly in front of him. "It contains allegations that are very serious." "They're not allegations," Aaliyah replied. "They're facts." He cleared his throat. "We understand that you've had some conflict with another student. We're looking into it. But posting content online without school authorization complicates the situation." Aaliyah blinked. "I didn't post a video." Daniel spoke next. "Still, this has drawn public attention, and we're under pressure to respond quickly. We'd like you to remain discreet while we investigate." Aaliyah tilted her head slightly. "Discreet? For your own protection, of course," Ms. Doran added, trying for a soothing tone. "This kind of exposure can bring unintended consequences." Aaliyah looked at all three of them, then said evenly, "You're not trying to protect me. You're trying to protect yourselves." There was a pause. Mr. Holloway exhaled. "We've also spoken with Logan's family. They retained legal counsel." "Of course they have. They're claiming the video was edited. They're threatening a defamation lawsuit." Aaliyah smiled bitterly. "Right, because the problem is the video, not what he did. We're asking that you don't speak to the media or other students about this until we concluded our review." "I haven't spoken to anyone. I've just been surviving." The silence hung heavy. "You're dismissed for now," Daniel said. "We'll keep you updated." Aaliyah left the office with her shoulders tight and her mind racing. She wasn't surprised. Not really. But it still cut deeper than she expected. They weren't interested in justice. They were interested in containment. That evening, she told her father everything. Malcolm listened without interrupting, face unreadable. When she finished, he stood up and left the room. 30 minutes later, Aaliyah overheard his voice from his home office. He wasn't yelling, but every word was laced with steel. "I'm not just a parent. I'm a federal agent. You will escalate this to the board. You will conduct a formal investigation. And if I find out that your staff dismissed a hate crime to protect a donor's child, I'll see to it that it's not just your careers on the line, it's your licenses." Aaliyah stood outside the door, listening. Not afraid, just certain. Later, her father emerged. He said nothing, but his eyes met hers and she saw the shift. The case was no longer isolated. It was active. The next day, Aaliyah arrived at school and saw new flyers posted around the halls. Someone had printed stills from the video, pairing them with quotes from the school's own handbook about student safety and non-discrimination. Bold text at the bottom read, "Do our rules only protect the privileged?" Someone else was speaking now. The silence was breaking. The tension that had once quietly pulsed beneath the surface of Lincoln High now roared just below the walls. By Monday morning, the story had broken into local headlines. The student blog that first posted the video had published a follow-up, this time naming the school, the administrators, and highlighting the systemic pattern of inaction stretching far beyond Aaliyah's incident. The words racial bias, student neglect, and institutional silence were now being used not just by students but by concerned parents and a growing list of community voices. But what no one inside the school expected, what Aaliyah herself didn't see coming, was a call that came late Sunday evening. Her father had been quietly working behind the scenes, contacting individuals in his professional circle, not as Agent Malcolm Carter, but as a father who had reached the edge of tolerance. The name Lincoln High had appeared on the radar of more than one agency's desk. That night, Malcolm received a call from a former colleague now stationed with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. They had questions, and they weren't going to ask them quietly. The next morning, Malcolm was at school before the first bell. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, badge on his hip, and a manila folder under one arm. He didn't knock when he entered the main office. He walked straight to the principal's door, opened it, and stepped inside. Mr. Holloway stood from his desk in a rush. Mr. Carter. Agent Carter, Malcolm corrected, his voice level. Let's talk. The conversation lasted just over 10 minutes, but the shift it caused echoed through the building by first period. Word spread that Aaliyah's father had confronted the administration directly. Some exaggerated, others speculated. But the facts were clear. Whatever protection Logan Miller had once enjoyed, it was rapidly eroding. In the cafeteria, students clustered around phones. A new post had gone up, not just a clip of the video, but a photo taken through the glass of the principal's office. Malcolm standing tall, folder in hand, Holloway mid-sentence, looking cornered. Someone captioned it, "Justice just walked in wearing a badge." During second period, Aaliyah was called out of class. But this time, it wasn't the administration. It was the media office. Local news had arrived. They weren't there to ambush her yet, but the presence of the press alone ignited fresh panic in the main office. By third period, an email was blasted out to all students and parents. Due to recent misinformation circulating online, we advise all students to refrain from engaging with the media. A formal statement will be issued shortly. The students weren't interested in waiting. By lunch, the library was full, not with students studying, but organizing. A group of juniors had started gathering testimonies. Others were drafting a petition demanding disciplinary action against Logan and calling for an independent review of how harassment cases were handled at the school. Aaliyah was sitting near the back of the room when Kayla approached her, clipboard in hand. "We've got over 100 signatures already, students and teachers." Aaliyah looked up, surprised. "Teachers?" Kayla nodded. "Mr. Langford, Ms. Poe, even the janitor signed. People are tired pretending." Jasmine arrived just after school ended. She wasn't smiling, but her energy carried purpose. She pulled Aaliyah aside outside the science building. "I've been contacted by someone from a student advocacy group. They want to talk to you." Aaliyah hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm ready for interviews." "They don't want an interview. They want to help. They've dealt with cases like this before." Aaliyah nodded slowly. "Okay, just not today." Jasmine didn't push. "You're doing more than anyone expected." "I didn't want to do any of this," Aaliyah said, her voice low. "I just wanted it to stop." Sometimes the only way to make something stop is to make it visible. As they spoke, a crowd had gathered outside the front doors. Not a protest, not yet, but something close. Students holding printed screenshots of the video, handwritten signs, silent but present. Aaliyah and Jasmine walked past them quietly. Some nodded to her, others avoided her gaze. But the energy had changed. She wasn't invisible anymore. That evening at home, her father sat at the dining room table with his laptop open and a phone pressed to his ear. He was calm, meticulous, taking notes in short bursts. His voice was no longer sharp with rage, but focused with intention. When he finished the call, he turned to Aaliyah. "They're opening a formal inquiry." Who? She asked. The Office for Civil Rights. They're coordinating with the DOJ. I'm staying out of their investigation, but I gave them everything I had. Aaliyah sank into the chair across from him. What does that mean? It means they'll be looking into more than just what happened to you. They'll look at patterns, complaints, staff behavior. If there's a culture of negligence, they'll find it. Aaliyah looked down at her hands. It's really happening, isn't it? Yes, her father said. But that also means things might get harder for a while. People don't like being forced to confront their failures. She met his eyes. I can handle it. He nodded once. I know. The next morning, as she entered the building, she noticed something taped to her locker. It wasn't a threat this time. It was a sticky note. A simple message written in black ink. Thank you for speaking when the rest of us couldn't. She didn't recognize the handwriting, but she kept the note. In homeroom, Mr. Reynolds paused a lesson to address the room. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that your voice matters. If you see something wrong, speak up. We don't silence truth here. For once, the room was still. Later that day, Logan returned to school after being absent for nearly 2 days. But he didn't walk through the halls with the same arrogance. His eyes moved quicker. His words were fewer. He no longer looked invincible. The tide was turning. But Aaliyah knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of what real accountability looked like. On Thursday morning, the front lawn of Lincoln High was unusually quiet for a school on the brink of something bigger than itself. The student body moved with an edge of uncertainty. Conversations whispered more than spoken, eyes flickering between classmates and phones. There was no more denying that what had started as an anonymous video had now evolved into a full-blown crisis. But for Aaliyah, the silence was misleading. Beneath it all, pressure was building. She stepped into the school with her head high, eyes forward. But within minutes, she noticed something was off. Teachers she had seen signing the petition earlier in the week avoided her gaze. Hall monitors who had once smiled at her didn't even acknowledge her presence. And when she arrived at her locker, the sticky note of support that had been left there was gone. Ripped off, only a corner still taped in place. It wasn't long before she found out why. During second period, an announcement came over the intercom. All students involved in recent social media circulation are to report to the main office immediately. The words were vague, deliberately so, but they were enough to send a clear message. Suppression had arrived disguised as procedure. Aaliyah found Kayla already sitting in the front office when she arrived. 2 other students, Marisol and Tyler, both of whom had spoken up recently, were there too. The secretary barely looked up. You'll be seen individually. They were each called into the conference room one by one. When it was Aaliyah's turn, she entered to find not only Principal Holloway and Vice Principal Daniels, but also a new face, a man in a navy blue suit, unfamiliar, stern. This is Mr. Redmond. Daniels said he represents legal counsel on behalf of the district. Aaliyah sat down without being asked. Mr. Redmond folded his hands. Miss Carter, you've been at the center of a rapidly developing situation. I'm here to clarify a few things, for your benefit and the school's. She said nothing. You're not in trouble, he continued. However, your decision to allow personal materials to be shared publicly has caused a significant disruption to the educational environment. We are asking that you formally state in writing that the video circulating was unauthorized and that you do not support its continued distribution. Aaliyah stared at him. You're asking me to lie. We're asking for clarity, Redmond replied. There's a lot of public misunderstanding right now. Holloway jumped in. We've received threats from people online. News vans are showing up outside. This is escalating beyond school matters. Daniels added, We're trying to protect our students, including you. Aaliyah leaned forward. Then protect them. Start with the ones being harassed. Start with the ones who get shoved into lockers and called names in front of crowds that pretend they didn't hear anything. Start with them. Redmond's jaw tightened. There are legal consequences to public defamation. Logan Miller's family has retained counsel. They're pursuing action. Aaliyah's voice was clear. Let them. She stood up. This meeting is over. By the time she returned to class, the whispers had shifted again. Rumors flew about legal threats, suspensions, even expulsion. Students who had once stood by her now hesitated. Some unfollowed her social media. Others deleted their supportive comments. Fear was contagious, and the administration was counting on it. In the hallway between classes, Logan passed her with a smug tilt of his head. "Still think you're the hero?" he muttered under his breath. Aaliyah didn't stop, but the words dug deeper than she let on. At home that evening, her father noticed a shift in her mood the second she walked through the door. "What happened?" he asked, closing his laptop. "They threatened legal action," she replied, her backpack dropping to the floor. His face didn't change, but his tone sharpened. "Against you?" "Not directly. Yet. But they're trying to scare everyone, including the ones speaking out." Malcolm stood slowly. "You're not to respond to anything they put in front of you. If anyone else contacts you, you send them to me." "I didn't sign anything," she said. "I know you didn't." But the weight had landed anyway. That night, Aaliyah sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the messages on her phone. Some were supportive, but others were full of doubt. "Why don't you just let it go? You're ruining the school's reputation. You could have just said sorry and moved on." Each one chipped away at her resolve. Jasmine called around 8 o'clock. "You okay?" "I don't know," Aaliyah admitted. "They're counting on that. That's the move. They corner you, make you feel alone, hope you fold. It's working." "No," Jasmine said firmly. "You're still here. That's the difference." The next morning at school, the atmosphere was even colder. Rumors swirled that Logan's father had contacted members of the school board personally, that funding for several school programs might be pulled if disciplinary action was taken. Teachers were being told not to discuss the situation in class. A silence policy had taken hold. But even silence couldn't erase what had already happened. Just before lunch, Aaliyah received a message from Marisol. "They called my parents, told them I was making things up, said they'd reconsider my scholarship application if I didn't retract my statement." Another from Tyler. "I'm out. I can't risk it. I'm sorry. By fourth period." The petition had been deleted. The student blog that had shared the video posted a retraction, clearly forced, and then shut down comments altogether. Aaliyah sat through the rest of the day in a kind of fog. Her body was there, but her mind was already retreating, rebuilding. They were trying to bury it, but she had already seen the truth. They weren't protecting the students. They were protecting their hierarchy, their funding, their control. That evening, she found her father waiting for her in the living room. "I spoke to the DOJ contact," he said. "They've received pressure to stand down. From above, someone's making phone calls." "So it's over?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "No," he said. "It means we're close." He placed a new file in front of her. "I've been compiling something. Dozens of complaints buried by this district in the last 3 years. Logan's father has connections, but even connections can't erase evidence." Aaliyah opened the file and read the first page. Her heart began to steady again. "This isn't over," she said. "No," Malcolm agreed. "It's just beginning." The next morning, Aaliyah woke to a fragile quiet in the house. Her father had left early, silent as he always was before a heavy day. Her mother was asleep, the softened fan the only sound in the room. Aaliyah sat at her desk, opened a file her father had given her the night before, and began reading through the pages. Complaint letters, internal memos, emails buried in old-school district archives, notes from past incidents that had been swept aside. Each document felt like a small revelation, incidents of biased discipline, complaints about racial slurs in classrooms, allegations of favoritism tied to donors. In each case, decisions to shelve or minimize were made. In several cases, parents withdrew their complaints quietly. Teachers who had attempted to speak up were warned. The patterns weren't random, they were systematic. And now they were connected. She spent the entire morning reading, making notes. When she finally closed the folder, her room was heavy with silence, dense with stories left untold. She held the papers in her lap, realizing that her father's involvement had changed everything. not by adding power to her cause, but by illuminating what was already there. By mid-morning, the principal's office corridor held a new tension. Whispers followed staff members. Students turned corners more cautiously. The posted flyers from earlier in the week had returned, this time with updated text incorporating data from the archived documents. Phone numbers, case dates, references to closed files. The school walls no longer felt like boundaries. They were battlegrounds. In first period, Aaliyah sat in English class. She glanced across the room to Naomi, a senior whose parents were on the school foundation board. Naomi met her eyes, then looked away. Their relationship had always been neutral, but now it felt heavy with possibilities. The teacher introduced the day's reading, but Aaliyah's attention drifted. Words on the page blurred as her mind lined up connections. Memos, disclaimers, cover-ups, a donor's name repeated in multiple documents. The school was much bigger than this one boy. This one moment. During the break, Kayla tapped her shoulder. They asked me to meet in the Commons after school. The student group. They want me to read a statement. Her voice trembled slightly. Aaliyah nodded. I'll be there. But in the hallway, as Aaliyah walked toward her locker, she ran into Ms. Poe, the geometry teacher who had quietly signed the petition earlier. Ms. Poe's usual nod was stiff. She lowered her voice. Thank you for not giving up. But be careful. They're watching everyone now. Aaliyah swallowed. I know. Ms. Poe hesitated. I wish I could do more. You already are, Aaliyah said quietly as she turned away. That afternoon, the pressure built further. More calls came in. Emails. Observers at the school board. Reporters. Her father had already prepared statements, but he urged patience. Let the investigation unfold. Let the evidence speak. At around 4 o'clock, the Commons area was packed. Students, teachers, some parents. The air was electric. Kayla climbed onto a bench and cleared her throat. She held a printed statement with shaky hands. My name is Kayla Martinez. On Tuesday afternoon, I recorded the incident between Aaliyah Carter and Logan Miller. I chose to hold the video because I wanted to make sure it was her voice that could control when it was shared. But the harm that was done, public, private, cannot be ignored. I saw what I saw. I know what I heard. This isn't just about one action. It is about what happens when people stay silent. Her voice cracked as students whispered, but she held eye contact. When she finished, there was a slow ripple of applause. Next, Marisol stood. She spoke about her own experience, about an incident where Logan had harassed her cousin. Tyler, after a moment's hesitation, shared his version, no longer a claim of cowardice, but concern for what could come if they stayed quiet. Aaliyah watched from the front row. She had not planned to speak tonight, but as voices rose, power and truth intertwining, she felt an urgency inside her. When Jasmine nudged her, she stood and joined them at the center. Murmurs broke out. All eyes shifted to her. She cleared her throat. I am Aaliyah Carter. What has happened to me is not just one instance. It is part of a pattern. The decisions our school, our district, even our community have made for years. For every person who stayed quiet after being called a name or shoved in a corridor, for every time we were told to let it go so no one got in trouble, for every student who was ignored, this is for them. Her voice faltered for just a heartbeat. I'm not doing this for retaliation. I'm doing it for change. And I want everyone here to know none of this goes away until we demand better. For a long moment, silence held the room. Then it broke, not in noise, but in movement. Students came forward. Teachers nodded. Parents wiped tears. The wall of isolation had cracked. That evening, her father returned to find his daughter changed. Not by fear or pressure, but by resolution. He joined her in the living room, and without prompts, she laid the archived documents on the table. He listened. He absorbed. And then he said, "You have every right to be heard." Outside their home, headlights passed, news vans parked down the street. The fight had become larger than them, but now it had momentum. The school board meeting that Thursday evening wasn't supposed to be public, at least not in the way it had become. What began as a standard agenda, budget approvals, cafeteria funding, end-of-semester testing updates, turned into a community-wide event. By late afternoon, the parking lot outside the district building was full. Students stood in small groups holding handmade signs. Parents gathered under umbrellas. News vans lined the street. The story was no longer something that could be minimized or delayed. It was now fully in the public eye. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was electric, tense, and watching. At the front of the long mahogany table sat 7 board members, each with their papers, microphones, and overly neutral expressions. They had already heard the whispers, seen the posts, read the public letters. And now, they would hear from Malcolm Carter. He sat near the front of the room, wearing a dark navy suit, shoulders squared, eyes calm. His daughter sat beside him, her expression unreadable but steady. Jasmine was there, too, along with Kayla, Marisol, several teachers, and a growing coalition of students and parents who refused to remain passive. Some came from schools across the district. Others had never spoken at a meeting before. But tonight, the room belonged to them. When the floor was open for public comments, the first voice came from a mother holding a folder full of documents. "My name is Denise Palmer. My son, Marcus, was suspended 2 years ago for a fight he didn't start. Logan Miller was involved. The report disappeared. We filed a complaint. It was never answered. But tonight, I'm here to say, this isn't just about my son anymore. It's about all of them." The second voice was a teacher, then a student, then another parent, and then Malcolm stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't brandish his badge. He didn't read from a script. "My name is Malcolm Carter," he began. "I'm a federal investigator. I've worked in national intelligence, counterterrorism, and civil rights enforcement. But tonight, I'm not here in any of those roles. I'm here as a father." A hush swept through the boardroom. Even the district's legal counsel looked up. "I'm here because my daughter was shoved against a locker, called a racial slur, and ignored by your staff. I'm here because when she tried to report it, she was dismissed. When students tried to support her, they were threatened. And when I brought this to your attention through the proper channels, I was met with silence." He held up a folder, one thicker than most of the ones the board members were used to seeing. "This is a collection of documented complaints spanning 4 years. Incidents involving harassment, discrimination, and abuse of authority. Many were filed and never investigated. Others were resolved internally with no record." He stepped closer to the microphone. "You protected donors. You've ignored patterns. You failed your students." He opened the folder and laid out page after page on the board's table. Photocopies, testimonies, email chains, legal notes. One document contained a full transcript of the incident between Aaliyah and Logan. Another outlined the timeline of administrative inaction. "And now," he continued, "your inaction has become public. The Department of Justice has been notified. The Office for Civil Rights is reviewing this case. And if this board does not take immediate steps to correct what has been allowed to flourish here, I will personally ensure that federal oversight becomes your daily reality." There was no applause, no cheers, just silence. Then he stepped back and returned to his seat beside Aaliyah, who had not moved the entire time. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a board member, a woman with silver hair and reading glasses, leaned forward. "We understand your frustration, Mr. Carter." He interrupted. "With all due respect, this isn't frustration. It's evidence. And if you fail to act now, it will become federal record." The rest of the meeting passed in an eerie fog. The remaining agenda items were skipped. A motion was passed to convene a special session. And before anyone could walk out, reporters had already begun surrounding the parking lot. Outside, the air was heavy with rain and flash photography. Aaliyah remained quiet. She wasn't interested in sound bites or interviews. Her statement had already been made. And as she stood beneath the overhang of the district building, watching as board members slipped out one by one avoiding cameras, she realized something. They had been forced to listen. On the ride home, her father didn't speak much. But when they pulled into the driveway, he looked over at her. "You did this," he said. "You gave them no choice." She stared out the window. "It's not over." "No," he agreed, "but it's beginning to move." The next morning, Lincoln High was suspended in a kind of stunned stillness. Everyone had seen the clips from the meeting, the screenshots of the documents, the quote from Malcolm that was now being shared across local news. Power doesn't protect you when the truth is louder. Teachers no longer pretended they didn't know what was happening. Students walked differently. Even Logan Miller, who arrived late and left early, moved through the halls like he knew his time was running out. In her locker, Aaliyah found a folded piece of paper. It was a note, typed, anonymous. It read, "There's more. Meet me after school. Auditorium." The auditorium smelled like dust and silence. Aaliyah stepped to the side entrance just after dismissal, her bag still slung over her shoulder, fingers curled tightly around the note she had found in her locker that morning. The room was dimly lit, the stage curtains closed, chairs empty. At the far end, a figure stood near the back row. She recognized him after a moment. Connor Wexler, a quiet junior who had shared 3 classes with Logan last semester. Not a friend, not an enemy. Someone who existed on the edges, always watching, rarely speaking. Connor turned when he saw her. He looked nervous, pale beneath the soft glow of the emergency exit lights. "I didn't know who else to go to," he said. Aaliyah nodded once. "Then go ahead." Connor pulled a USB drive from his jacket pocket. "This is everything." She didn't move. Everything. Screenshots, group chats, videos, voice recordings. "It's not just you, Aaliyah. It never was." He handed her the drive, fingers trembling. "I was part of it, not the worst of it. But I laughed. I stayed quiet. And then I saw what they did to you." Aaliyah studied him for a long moment. "Why now?" He swallowed. "Because you made it impossible not to. Because if I keep pretending I didn't know, then I'm just like them." She took the drive without another word. Connor nodded and stepped back into the shadows. She waited a full minute before leaving the auditorium, slipping the USB into her coat pocket, her heartbeat quickening not with fear, but with confirmation. At home that evening, she handed the drive to her father without explanation. He plugged it in, scanned the contents, and within moments his expression darkened. "There are audio recordings here," he said. "Group messages. Evidence of coordinated harassment. Not just from Logan, but from others." Teachers ignored it. Some even knew. He clicked through folders, voice tight. "This isn't just bullying. This is a systemic failure." One video file opened with a familiar hallway. Logan pushing a student named Theo into a locker. Laughter. The same tone. The same pattern. Another video showed Logan mocking a student with a stutter during class while the teacher looked on silently. A folder labeled Locker Room Chats revealed audio recordings, one of which captured Logan bragging about getting away with it because his father had half the board in his pocket. Another file was simply titled, "January 11th Meeting." It was a voice memo. "Don't worry," an adult voice said. "The board knows how to handle noise. We let this one cool off. Tell your son to stay quiet. We're not losing donations over one angry girl." Malcolm paused the audio, eyes cold. "That's a board member." Aaliyah sat beside him in silence. The room was quiet. The weight of what she held was no longer theoretical. It was a web, deep, documented, and finally undeniable. The next morning, Malcolm submitted a sealed report to the DOJ. By lunchtime, word had spread that multiple staff members had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. One teacher didn't return from their lunch break. Another was escorted out quietly by the vice principal. The counselor who had once told Aaliyah that Logan's aggression was probably a misunderstanding was nowhere to be seen. But the biggest shift came just before the final bell. The school board issued a public statement. Logan Miller had been suspended indefinitely. A full district-wide review of racial discrimination claims had been initiated, and the district's legal team would cooperate fully with the ongoing civil rights investigation. Students flooded the hallways with stunned silence. No cheers, no celebration, just understanding. They had never seen someone like Logan face consequences. Not here, not like this. That afternoon, a local news van waited outside the school gates. The reporter wasn't looking for a soundbite. She was looking for Aaliyah. She approached respectfully. "I know you haven't given interviews," she said, "but this has become bigger than our district. Students across the state are watching. Parents are demanding accountability. Do you have anything you'd like to say?" Aaliyah thought for a moment. Then she said, "This didn't happen because of one video. It happened because too many people stayed silent for too long. If speaking up makes me a problem, then maybe this school needed a few more problems." The clip went viral within hours. By evening, Aaliyah's inbox overflowed. Messages came from students she didn't know, from parents thanking her for being brave, from alumni saying they'd gone through the same thing and never found the courage to speak. One message stood out. It was from Theo, the student in the video being shoved into the locker. He wrote, "You gave me my voice back. I'll never forget that." At home, her father met her with a rare smile, not pride, but recognition. She had crossed the threshold, not just into action, but into legacy. That night, Aaliyah stood at her window, staring out at the darkness stitched with streetlights. She no longer felt like a target. She felt like a mirror, one that had forced an entire system to look at itself and flinch. The following Monday morning dawned still and strange. For the first time in weeks, Aaliyah arrived at Lincoln High to find no glares, no whispered threats, and no hovering silence dripping with unspoken tension. Instead, the hallway moved with an unusual calm. Some students nodded to her in quiet solidarity. Others simply stepped aside without a word. The buzz wasn't gone, but its texture had changed, less sharp, less loaded. Something had shifted permanently. She had barely reached her locker when an announcement came over the intercom. "Aaliyah Carter, please report to the main office." For a moment, she froze. The last time she had been summoned that way, it had been the beginning of an attempt to shut her down. But this time, she moved toward the front of the school with steady feet. She didn't ask questions. She didn't speculate. Inside the office, Principal Holloway stood with a printed envelope in his hand. His posture was rigid, eyes tired. He gestured to the small conference room with the air of someone trying to avoid direct conflict. She followed him in and took a seat. "There's been a lot of attention on our school these last few weeks," he began. "Some of it difficult, much of it deserved." Aaliyah said nothing. "We've reviewed the material you and your father submitted. The Department of Justice is continuing their investigation. We've been advised by our legal team not to comment further on the specifics, but we do want to acknowledge the harm done." He slid the envelope across the table. "It's a formal apology from the school board in this office. It will also be issued publicly this afternoon." Aaliyah opened the envelope and read it silently. The language was carefully chosen, apologizing for institutional failures, acknowledging her courage, and admitting a lack of adequate response. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't undo what happened, but it was finally something real. "There's more," Holloway added, clearing his throat. "We're establishing a student-led diversity and equity council, as recommended by the state. You're being asked to join as a founding member." Aaliyah looked up. "I wasn't doing this for a committee." "I understand that," he replied, not unkindly. "But change needs infrastructure. This is one way to begin that work. On your terms." She folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. "I'll think about it." As she exited the office, the door behind her felt smaller than it had the week before. The school, once oppressive in its silence, now seemed to move with a wary sense of awakening. By lunchtime, the apology had been posted on the school's website. Screenshots circulated quickly. Students read it aloud between classes. Teachers whispered about it in lounges. Some were relieved, others skeptical, but few remained indifferent. At home, her mother printed the letter and pinned it to the fridge, saying only, "Let it be a beginning, not an end." Jasmine stopped by later that afternoon. She didn't ask questions. She simply sat on the floor of Aaliyah's room with her back against the bed frame. "You good?" she finally asked. "I think so," Aaliyah replied. "Do you think he'll come back?" "Logan?" "Yeah." Aaliyah thought about it. "Maybe, but if he does, it won't be the same. The silence he relied on isn't there anymore." Jasmine smiled faintly. "That's because you broke it." They stayed there for a while. sharing quiet, not needing to fill the space with more words. Outside, the sky had begun to shift into the soft tones of late afternoon. That evening, Aaliyah joined her father on the porch. He was reading again, glasses low on his nose. She didn't interrupt. She just sat beside him, the same way he had done for her after long days when she was younger and didn't have the language yet to explain what felt wrong. He spoke without looking up. "You've done something most people never do." "I didn't ask for any of it," she said softly. "No," he agreed, "but you still chose to carry it. And now others don't have to carry theirs alone." The next day, she attended the first meeting of the new Diversity Council. It was a strange mix of teachers, administrators, and students, some sincere, some cautious, some visibly out of their depth. But when Aaliyah spoke, the room listened. She outlined what hadn't worked before, what needed to be addressed first, and what wasn't negotiable. She didn't ask for validation. She offered direction. By the end of the meeting, 2 more students had volunteered to join. One of them was Marisol. Another was Naomi, the senior who had once stayed silent, but now stood beside her, ready to speak. In the weeks that followed, the changes began to materialize, not loudly, not perfectly, but tangibly. A revised student code of conduct, mandatory staff training on bias and de-escalation, a new reporting system for student complaints that bypassed administrators entirely and sent incidents directly to district monitors. Logan's father resigned from the school foundations board. Several teachers were reassigned or placed under review. And while the investigation continued at the federal level, the culture of denial at Lincoln High had been punctured, if not fully dismantled. Aaliyah kept her head down in the hallways, not because she was hiding, but because she was focused. She had resumed her sketching, not with the old sense of escape, but with a new purpose. Faces, yes, but also maps, lines of connection, reflections of what it meant to challenge power without losing yourself in it. People began to ask her advice, not just students, but teachers, counselors. Even the principal, once cold and evasive, now approached her during passing periods to confirm meeting dates and request feedback. She remained cautious, but she participated, because now she could do so on her own terms. By the time spring arrived, the air around Lincoln High had changed. There were still problems, still whispers, but the silence that once surrounded injustice had been pierced. And the girl who once sat alone in the library, headphones in with no music playing, was no longer watching from the edge. She was building something new, brick by careful brick. 3 months had passed since the school board meeting. Spring had bled into early summer, and the hallways of Lincoln High now pulsed with the end-of-year energy that came with final exams, graduation rehearsals, and the quiet chaos of yearbook signings. The storm that once engulfed the school had not disappeared entirely, but had settled into something more permanent. A wound that had been exposed, cleaned, and left a scar on its own terms. For Aaliyah Carter, the world hadn't gone back to what it was. It had become something else entirely. She was no longer just a new girl or the quiet one, or the subject of whispers and speculation. She had become, whether she wanted to roll or not, a symbol. And while some symbols faded with time, hers had rooted itself in action, results, and presence. On the final Monday of the school year, she was invited to speak at the state's Youth Leadership Summit, an annual gathering of students, educators, and community advocates who work to address equity, policy, and reform across school systems. The invitation had come through the Diversity Council's liaison, and at first, Aaliyah considered declining. She didn't need another spotlight. But Jasmine, sitting across the kitchen table, had simply said, "This isn't about being seen. It's about being heard on your terms." And so, Aaliyah agreed. The summit was held in Richmond, in a large, echoing auditorium usually reserved for college orientations and local government events. When she arrived with her father and Jasmine, the building was already buzzing with activity. Students in matching lanyards filled the entryway. Educators greeted one another with cautious enthusiasm, and camera crews loitered in corners waiting for the keynote session. Aaliyah was led backstage by one of the organizers. Her name was Renee, a soft-spoken woman in her 30s who read every word of the Lincoln High case file. "You're closing the summit," she said. 5 minutes. Just you, No introductions, no panels. The space is yours. Aaliyah stood behind the curtain as speakers before her talked about new policies, digital equity, mental health access. She didn't take notes. She didn't check her phone. She simply waited. When her name was called, the lights dimmed and then rose slowly over the stage. Aaliyah stepped into them with slow breath, gripping the sides of the podium with hands that no longer trembled. The crowd before her was still, waiting. She didn't start with a story. She didn't even introduce herself. She just spoke. When something breaks in front of you, when something painful or violent or wrong happens right where you can see it, there's a voice inside that tells you to stay silent. That voice sounds like fear. Sometimes it sounds like logic, but it's still fear. I know because I listened to it for a long time. She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. I didn't speak because I thought I had to be stronger first, or smarter, or more protected. I thought the only way to fight back was with anger or authority or perfect words. But then I realized something. She leaned forward slightly, voice soft but resolute. You don't need fists to fight injustice. You just need truth, spoken out loud, once, and then again, and again, until the silence has nowhere left to hide. The auditorium remained quiet, focused. I was shoved into a locker and called something I won't repeat. It happened in front of dozens of students and teachers. It was caught on video. It was denied. It was ignored. And it could have ended right there. Another pause. But someone recorded it. Someone sent it to me. Someone refused to let me carry that moment alone. That's how it began. Not with outrage. Not with revenge. But with a moment of truth that didn't disappear. Aaliyah straightened, letting her hands rest at her sides now. Since then, a student was suspended. A school board was forced to change. An investigation began that still hasn't ended. And more importantly, students who thought their stories didn't matter began to speak. She took a slow breath. I'm not a hero. I'm not a warrior. I'm just a girl who didn't want to keep walking past the same injustice and pretending it was normal. Her final words were measured, quiet, but undeniable. You don't have to fight with fists when the truth is strong enough to knock down walls. She stepped back on the podium, and for a full 5 seconds, the room held still. Then a slow rising began, not in claps or cheers, but in movement. One by one, people stood. No one spoke. No one shouted. They just rose. A standing silence. A recognition. A mirror. Later, backstage, Renee approached her with glassy eyes. You just changed someone's life out there. Maybe 100 someone's. Aaliyah didn't reply. She didn't need to. That evening, as she and her father drove home under a sky smeared with orange and violet, he turned to her. You found your voice, he said. She stared out the window. No, I always had it. I just stopped whispering. Back at school, Logan's absence had become permanent. His family had moved out of state. His father's influence revoked. No formal statement was issued by them, but no one needed one. The silence they left behind was louder than any apology could have been. The Diversity Council continued its work through the summer, preparing a new framework for restorative justice, equity mentorships, and a reporting app designed by a group of senior coders. Aaliyah didn't lead every meeting. She didn't want to. She wanted the movement to be larger than her, to belong to the many. On the final day of school, she sat in the library where it had all started, back when she wore headphones with no music playing, watching everything from a safe distance. This time, her notebook was open, and she was sketching faces again. Not victims, not enemies, just people, real and imperfect. As the last bell of the year rang out across Lincoln High, Aaliyah smiled quietly to herself, not because it was over, but because it had begun. The silence was gone now, and in its place, there was something louder, something true, something unstoppable.